Welcome to the Talking Serverless podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Jones, joined today by Michael Liendo. How are you doing today, Michael?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's been really interesting to kind of prep for this podcast episode. I see that you're doing a lot of stuff. So
I'm trying to get some quality content out there. You can usually find me everywhere these days. Just trying to put something out there so that people can enjoy.
yeah, no, that's amazing. And I see the AWS Community Builder shirt as well. Is that recent, or how has that been?
I've been part of the program since the beta. So before they initially launched, they brought a couple of us in to kind of get our feel and our take on things. So it's been really fun to see the new additions, because I think we're over. I actually don't even know the number, but it's well into the hundreds of members now, which is really, really cool.
That's awesome. And something that I typically do when I bring people onto the podcast, and I'm always fascinated myself as well, is like how did you get to tech, and like what was that journey, and like if you took us back a few years, like what was the initial steps that kind of brought you to where you are today?
Oh, geez, I have the wildest intro to tech story. Okay, so let's flash back to like 2006, and I freshly dropped out of college. I went to college for education, and I just wasn't feeling it. And I was just like, "Yeah, Dad. I mean, I know that you've like funded this, but I mean, nah. I think I'm gonna model." And he was like, "What?" And that's what I did. I modeled professionally for about 5 to 6 years, just mainly in the Midwest. And speaking of where you're from, in the Texas space as well. So got to travel, see a lot of the country. But my agent was like, "Hey, what if something happens to the moneymaker? What's your backup plan?" And coincidentally, the big thing around that time was sort of this gadget known as the iPhone. And Angry Birds just happened to be this hot game. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and start building apps. And I literally just picked up a book and struggled. And sure enough, after 3 months, I realized that I really sucked at making apps. So I took a stab into JavaScript and started building out web pages and got familiar that way. And sure enough, after many years, and I guess I'm still learning JavaScript, nobody's ever really done. But I found my way into tech, into lead position roles and instructor roles as well. But it's been quite the journey.
Yeah, I mean that is quite a journey. Yeah, the idea of modeling professionally, traveling around, that's so crazy. So did it give you like a unique perspective once you started getting involved in tech? And do you think that there was like some potential like crossover that might be unique specifically to your experience?
Between modeling and strictly tech, no.
Okay.
But fortunately, if things had stayed the same between modeling and tech, then it would have been a hard no. Like there's no correlation. Funny enough, what we're seeing now is that there's this shift where there's more focus put onto things like soft skills and how you can engage in front of new members like you and I are doing right now, and just sort of how you present yourself. And that's really where that whole modeling aspect comes into play. In particular, I would say in the field of like evangelism, developer advocacy, and marketing, where you really have to put your personality into a certain product. It's essentially all a model is at the end of the day, it's just a brand ambassador.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So like to dive into soft skills a bit, what would you say the importance is of soft skills, today in tech? And where would you put that on the spectrum?
It's definitely up there. And in my opinion, it's always been more of the soft skills than the hard skills. There's that sort of mantra of, you can bring on someone who can code in a cubicle all day, every day, but, is that someone who you want on your team? And is that the sort of culture that you want to drive within your company? And more often than not, the answer is going to be no, that's not your prime candidate. Certainly, you'll have diversity amongst your candidacy, and that might be someone on your team, but large and whole, that's not going to be the makeup of your entire organization. You're going to want folks that can interact, talk about their problems, and be open with one another. So those soft skills definitely play a huge part in that.
I've definitely found that to be true. Yeah, my own experience as well is like having good soft skills, and then being able to, it almost gives you more of an ability to learn any missing like technical skills, just
Yeah.
because you get that like that team player aspect of it. You get to be able to like mix into teams very well and like understand where people are coming from, and also just make positive impact, at least emotionally and stuff, right off the back. And then once you have that little bandwidth, then you can start, scaling up. And I had a similar experience to that when I started at in Nike, and then got in there and I was like around all these like world-class developers and stuff. And I was like, oh man. And it was just like, just show up, Ryan, be like positive, try to be a team player, try to like absorb like a sponge as much as possible. And then, gradually, I think the soft skills kind of, allowed me to get a little bit more than I probably should have. So, yeah. And then moving on past professional modeling, when you said that you got into tech and we're doing like front end and some, I think I sell Egghead instructor as well. What does that side look like?
It sort of encompasses a lot of it, where those soft skills are at the fork in the road where they meet tech. So you want to bring it all together, present yourself in a way so that you can sort of distill that technology bit into something that others can digest. And for me, that's always sort of been the holy grail of what I aspire to achieve, is know a piece of tech so well that you can break it down so that others who aren't familiar with it can get up to speed quicker than you could. It's more challenging than what I thought it would be, but ACAD is a great platform that guides you into helping you sort of broadcast that to others. It's been pretty fun.
Yeah. So when you've made these courses, what has been the content so far, and like what have the courses been about?
Yeah, shame on me. I don't have any published courses at the moment. I'm currently working with them to get an AWS workshop in the works. But even to get into being an ACAN instructor, it's a bit of a journey where they want to make sure that you're able to present yourself. Of course, they work with you on making sure that your audio and your formatting is correct and aligned with what they like to put out. But the hardest thing would, mm, yeah, I'm going to say that the hardest thing is definitely getting out of that YouTube mindset where it's like, hey, folks, how are you? Michael Liendo here. They're very much so like, let's get to the point. Developers, they clicked on your video for a particular reason. And so you don't need to tell them who you are. They can look up who you are. And you don't have to tell them, what you talked about last time. They don't care. They clicked on you for this time. It's been pretty fun. I still have a YouTube channel where I do that same old school, I'm going to put like air quotes here, old school type of way. But I also have content where it's like, all right, this is going to be a 2-minute video, short and sweet, but you're going to get jam packed full of information. So it definitely is a mind shift that I encourage everybody to try out.
Yeah, I've experienced something similar to that. I made a course online and I found myself in the training course as being like, hey, it's Ryan, welcome to the video. And it's like
every video.
Every video. And then I went back and edited and I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't need to say this. And I just like cut parts of it out of like every single video that sometimes be like, as you know, we talked about last time, and then get into like post-production. It's like last time actually got cut. So like now this whole part is like irrelevant.
Oh yeah.
No, so that's really interesting. And that's cool to hear that there's something in the works around AWS workshop there. So definitely stay tuned on that front. And then thinking about some of the type of developments, like when you think about like cloud development spectrum and like people are working on like web apps and mobile apps and backend processing stuff and ETLs and big data and machine learning, where do you kind of where's like your area of focus?
Certainly, my niche has always been in the front end to serverless space. It's a very defined niche, and I want to emphasize that I've spent a lot of time trying to like understand where it is that I find the most sort of gratitude and the ability to give back to others, and that person who is transitioning from the front end space to the serverless space, or maybe they're part of a large startup team, a greenfield team, and they want to get up and running with servers very quickly. That is definitely where I've shined. I've dabbled in the whole migrating EC2s over to serverless space. It just isn't quite what does it for me. Uh, Shout out to anybody who like takes pure fulfillment in that. But I really do like that helping other space, and having that front end mentality is what delivers that. I've been in serverless since I guess the Alexa SDK came out, and having that as just like a quick way to get into this was huge for me. We can get that sort of instant feedback by saying, "Hey, Alexa, do something," and it would run that function. So I don't know. I guess I had a little bit of influence on where I am today, but I definitely do try to spend a lot of time making sure that the content I put out is for those individuals in particular.
Yeah, no, I found myself in like a similar space, and like thinking back to when I first started working with serverless, it was actually with the I think it was the Alexa SDK as well. Like like I was in a code school, and
Mm-hmm.
we had a group project, and it was like, okay, we could make a traditional web application or like make some type of like mobile app or something, and it was like, all right, but let's use Alexa, and let's just go like completely
It's so
off the
fun.
cliff. Yeah, and it was for train arrivals instead of Portland, so it would be like you ask Alexa, like, when is the next green line going to come at like this location? And then it would give you back, like, it'll be here in, some hopefully accurate number,
Mm-hmm.
and it was so cool. It was like that moment where Alexa talked back and was like, wow, this is really engaging and really cool. And you could just
Mm-hmm.
see it on people's faces, like, wow, this is like, goes really far. And then in that process, same as you got experience into what is AWS in a deep way with serverless, and how do these things work, and like what is behind Alexa, and all that stuff. And it kind of kicked off the journey. And so that's really cool to hear that we have kind of a similar stories there.
Well, you were more meaningful with your approach. Mine was just completely trying to be the laziest I could be. Uh,
Okay.
my journey with Alexa, just to kind of maybe a brief tangent, is I was consulting with our local chamber of commerce and helping them sponsor some meetup events. And every day they would have individuals sign up to take part in these online meetups, and then back then in person meetups, if we can remember what that was like. So the cool thing was that I had Alexa. Well, I piped in a CSV to Alexa, and I would be like, "Hey Alexa, go ahead and convert this to a JSON format, so that way I could go ahead and put it onto a web app." And sure enough, that was what I ended up doing. It wasn't so much as like the interaction; it was just me telling Alexa to do something and then running some automation. So just purely like just trying to make my life easier and simpler, just for myself. It wasn't quite as like helping the masses on public transportation that you had.
Oh yeah, no, it's I've had we did a chatbot a long time ago where we did something similar to Alexa, and it was pretty much just that. It was like, if they say map,
Yeah,
then show the map, and it was like it did well enough for just a simple use case.
yeah.
So how has that like expanded once you started doing that stuff and getting your feet wet with it? What kind of followed on after that?
Yeah, I want to make sure that maybe folks listening to this understand like my journey in particular, it was very front end focused. So even though I had Alexa like in my pocket, which introduced me to Lambda, it was still at the end of the day like that's considered front end technology. I mean VUI, so your visual user interface is still a guiding principle there. But my transition was all right. Well, let's go ahead and maybe extend Lambda. Let's see what else we can do. Does it have to be in Alexa, or can I go ahead and use it in conjunction with S3? And so I started to put my simple websites together, sort of the hello world of serverless. Is like let's get a static website up and running with Lambda S3, and then we'll slowly integrate working in a database, and we'll slowly integrate putting an API layer on top of it, and then last but not least, we'll add on some authentication with incognito. And that was pretty much my safe space for I want to say maybe a year and a half of like I just got super familiar with handling that.
So when it comes to that, and it comes to like the front end space, and then how you hosted that static web host, I want to say that I looked on your YouTube channel, Focus Otter, for those who don't know it. I think I saw something around Amplify. How big of a role has Amplify been in kind of your journey so far? Is it something that you're excited about still? Is it something that you kind of did for a little bit and now you're doing something else?
It's been pivotable. It's made a huge pivot in the way that I was able to get up and running on these static sites. prior to, even with infrastructure as code, you always have to run these same commands. And back then, I'm just working in the console, so I'm literally clicking around at this point blindfolded because I've just done it so many times. But whenever I tried to help somebody else get up to speed, I had to first bring them to that standpoint of, do you understand Lambda, S3, API Gateway, etc.? However, with Amplify, I was like, okay, we're going to go ahead and download this CLI. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Amplify is just a way to abstract some of the automation things that you would do in AWS. So through this CLI, I'd be like, hey, we're going to go ahead and add storage. And I wouldn't have to explain DynamoDB to them or even mention that this is a database that we're added. It's like, we're going to add some storage here. And then if we wanted to maybe add in images, I would say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and add in some more storage. And it was just sort of this sort of entity that we could shape and mold in a way that fit our front end developer brains. And it just made things super easy to explain. And with that, it made it easier to teach. Because if I wanted to host a static website, I would just say, all right, we're going to run this CLI command. It's going to be called Amplify Add Hosting. And whoever I was sort of onboarding at that time, whether it be myself or somebody else, I wouldn't have to explain or get too deep in the weeds on what was happening behind the scenes. It was just trusted that some AWS developer had already gone through all the pain points that I had gone through to help scaffold things out. So it's been huge in my sort of developer experience of things.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you said around like, trusting an AWS developer that already built this automation. And, to a large degree, it's kind of what we've done with, just like cloud in general. And, first it was like virtual machine. They were like, okay, we're going to trust AWS engineers. They're better at, setting up and hosting these virtual machines than we are running our servers and just tapping into that. And then what you're kind of describing, which is very interesting, is like now we're relying in almost like in a serverless way to AWS developers to kind of handle even more of that abstraction process. Mm-hmm. Do you see that being like a future trend that's going to keep getting expanded on?
I do. The level of abstraction that AWS is currently providing just seems to be layers and layers on top of itself, which is great because one of the chief complaints is that AWS has so many services within its ecosystem that it's hard to pick which one because oftentimes we have competing services. So as AWS sort of, I guess, listens to their customers and layers their own services together, we don't have to nitpick about which ones we're using. And the more they can do that, the better off we'll be. Obviously, there's more opinions when you do it that way. But the cool thing is that I don't see, whenever you use one of their services that is an abstraction, they typically don't paint you into a black box. So if you're using Amplify or SAM, for example, if it doesn't work out, well, those services are still yours. You still have access to them under the hood. With Amplify, if it's creating an S3 or an S3 bucket, you can still dive into those services and modify them to your liking. With AWS SAM, if those serverless models aren't working for you, you can still dive down deeper into CloudFormation and work with it that way. So I do appreciate the fact that they do that. And yeah, I do see it as a growing trend that they'll continue to do.
Awesome. Yeah, and I also saw that. Shout out to Jonathan, who's our marketing manager, that helps us with some prep. He posted a GitHub link that you had, where I believe that you created an AWS Amplify plugin. I wasn't even aware they had plugins. So like, could you talk through what AWS Amplify plugins are and kind of what you helped create?
Yeah, for sure. For me, that was just sort of a teaser on what could be possible with Amplify. There's a couple other plugin authors that I've tried to work with to put out more and more. But for me in particular, this was sort of when Amplify first came out. What I found myself doing was consistently reaching for the documentation and using the Amplify CLI itself. So if I forgot how to add or update authentication inside of Amplify, I'd have to go to the browser, look through the docs. And instead of doing that, I created a plugin, which is just another extension that I could bolt on to Amplify itself. So that way, somebody could say, hey, Amplify, what was it? What was the command? Amplify docs API. And that would take me straight to the documentation site for the API section of Amplify. And through the use of options, you could also pass in things like Amplify docs, API dash dash React or Angular, and it would take you to the corresponding documentation section for those services. It can be a little bit tricky because now you're keeping up with like you're dependent on the docs. It's like web scraping, right? It's like as soon as they change it, your application can break. But the benefit of doing that is that it allowed me to sort of get an inside scoop into the Amplify team, where if they saw that I was maintaining that plugin, I had a direct link now to go ahead and chat with them. Say, hey, are there any upcoming features that you might be adding to the docs? Can we maybe chat about it? And it allowed me to get very close to the team and even get a preview into some upcoming features that weren't publicly available yet.
No, that's amazing, and I think that's probably a good segue into another topic, which is what is it like being an AWS Community Builder and being close to these teams, and what is it like on the the other side of the Slack channel, the AWS Community Slack channel that has like all the major people that are on Twitter and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's intimidating, right? You're in a side by side chat room with Nader Dabbitt, who isn't with AWS at the moment, but he still has such a huge influence, or James Bezic, who just puts out amazing quality content on serverless itself, or shout out to, oh my goodness, I only know him by his Twitter handle, Corey Quinn,
Oh yeah.
and it's just like these amazing influencers, and then like here I am, I'm just like, well, I made a new blog post, folks, hope you like it. But it's just really cool because you get to pick their brains. You get inside information into stuff that isn't available just yet. Obviously, like some of that stuff is under NDA, but you also get perks and benefits. I mean, I think I'm just repping it because it's just what I wear. But I mean, like we have this like community builder shirt and community builders mug, and they just ship you out all of that good stuff. There's tons of benefits. I mean, AWS credits get thrown your way, so that way you just have free reign to build. And you can also ask folks, which is probably the biggest benefit of all, is that if you get stuck on something, you now have this huge pool of individuals with extreme knowledge that you can just sort of tap into. And everybody's sole purpose is to build up the community. So there's a pretty good chance that you're going to get some feedback right away.
Hmm. Yeah, to kind of like stitch two different topics together is have like soft skills and we have like the community aspect of AWS. Do you feel like building a community and the way that AWS is going about that with the community builders, do you think that that's going to play like a critical role in like this whole like cloud, almost like cloud wars that we have going? Like, how do you think about that?
I've always felt that as long as you can have developers on your side, uh, your service is in a keen spot to win. I think that even on the front end space, there's no shortage of arguments that folks debate on when it comes to front end technologies. But there's a huge spot saying that, hey, maybe Vue is better than React. And I mean, I'm biased because I've worked in React for so long that I love it, but I've spent enough time in Vue to be like, why isn't this the framework that we're using? But I think a lot of it is just developer support. Like we have an ecosystem of developers that are built around React applications. So it'd be really tough for another framework to come into place when there's already so much being managed in that regard. And the same is key for when you talk about AWS. If you have a huge amount of developers that are supporting your infrastructure and they're putting out content in the community, it's going to be really tough to migrate all of us over to your new service. And I mean, shout out to Azure and Google. They're doing a great job. It's just that AWS had the leg up from the get-go.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see like what this effect has and like long term for AWS as it keeps expanding. Yeah, and I think I think kind of like switching topics almost a little bit. I almost wanted to drill back into your YouTube channel and focus Otter again. And what is the like what led you to starting it? I know we kind of talked on it a little bit, and also what is your plan with it moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely my weakest aspect of social media branding, but just because it's gone through so many different twists and turns, I wasn't posting regularly at the beginning, but I was posting quality content, and then I was trying to get views up. So then my what suffered was the quality that I was putting out. I was just playing a numbers game. And it wasn't until I was reading about Jonathan Stark and his books about, it's just quality at a consistent rate. And I mean, he's big on like the whole don't pay for hourly billing, pay for, your services. I was like, well, let me go in and define myself. So I had this focus outer idea, which was just like a Google search of like what I wanted to stitch together. But it allowed me to take myself out of the picture because everything was previously under Michael Liendo. And I found that that was my big blocker. I didn't feel comfortable getting a camera and saying, hey, this is Michael Liendo. I needed to remove myself from the equation so that I could focus that much more on my content. Once I did that, funny enough, like it just took something, it just plays like a trick on my mind. I was like, okay, cool. I can go ahead and put out fresh content about material that whoever asks for and just try to help them as an individual. And it's been pivotal. I put out a tweet saying, "Hey, what are your frustrations in working with AWS?" And 100 folks got back to me, and I went through each and every comment, categorized them, and I made a video saying, "Let me go ahead and address your individual questions, and I'll do my best to answer them." There were things like, "Why does AWS have so many services?" Or "Why is the billing so difficult to understand?" And I don't work at AWS, but I just did my best to answer them to the best of my ability. And I think that they appreciated that I took their actual tweets and put them in the video. So it was like I was talking to them directly. It's been huge. It's been great. It's a challenge because I'm just horrible at editing, but it does give me something else to branch out to and get better at. So it does, at the end of the day, help out the community while increasing my skill set. So
Oh, that's
sort of
amazing.
a long-winded answer to say it's going great and I'm still working on it.
Yeah, 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 totally. And then when it comes to that type of content, now that you've seen having the tweets inside of the asking the community, using that community feedback, including it in videos, is that the type of stuff that you want to keep expanding on?
I do like it, but I think I want to focus more on tutorials and every once in a while doing like a Q&A. I think that format works best for me. I do appreciate other developers and enthusiasts who can just go in and just speak to their audience regularly. I think that would consume too much of my time if I did that. Rather, I really like diving deep into a piece of technology, breaking it out and saying, oh, well, from this project, I can carve out 3 separate YouTube videos and deliver that to my users. So I think a good example is right now I'm building out a game where you can play sort of online with anybody and connect with them and play things like tic-tac-toe and Connect 4. It's fairly trivial, but it does encompass a lot of different things to consider. So I'm building it out with Amplify, and with that, I'm showcasing, well, how do you have users with unique usernames? Because the way that Cognito works is your emails can be unique, but usernames are a bit tricky. So how do we do that? Well, you need sort of to understand Cognito triggers, and there's pre-sign up and post confirmation triggers that go along with that, and you sort of take it from there.
Yeah. So to touch on the idea behind that, when it comes to how you learn and how maybe the best way to deliver that type of information, do you follow the kind of project based learning aspect, or is there a different methodology that you follow when trying to learn new topics or teach new topics?
Yeah, definitely. Shout out to Nader Davitt once again on how much of an influence he's had on me in particular. We met up at a conference, and ever since that moment, we've sort of chatted here and there behind the scenes, and I call it the Nadirian approach, where he will build a project, and this is just sort of what I do as well now, is to learn something. He will first build a project, and then he'll write about it, and then he'll make a video about it, and then he'll build up a little bit more after he's made it open source. So there's this constant cycle of here's something I made. I'm going to put it out in various formats, which means that I need to be better at writing. I need to be better at video making. And it's still just one project. And when it's all said and done, I'm going to go ahead and make it available, the code available to everyone so that I can make it better and sort of repeat the cycle from there. Because you're going to get people saying, hey, did you know that you could do it this way? Well, great, thanks for showing me. I'm going to go ahead and create some more content so that other people are aware of that as well. And doing that it's super time consuming. Don't get me wrong there, but it is by far for me the best way to get that cemented in my brain, because too many times I've been in like YouTube or tutorial hell where it's like, oh yeah, I listened to that 10-minute video. I definitely understand everything that's going on now. Like, no, you got to build with it.
Yeah, 100%. There was a shout out to Neighbor David for kind of being I look to him as well when I'm like trying to figure out how to approach different things. I know that he's now I believe he's in the Ethereum blockchain space, which he's just like made that transition, which is so
Killing
cool
it.
to watch. Yeah, just completely killing it. And I had something where it was building a course, and then it was super. I felt like, oh man, this is so long winded the way that I was tackling like trying to teach people how to use Lambda. And it was like, because normally in my day to day, and probably same for you, it's like we're at the point now where it's like infrastructure is code. Let's use like some more advanced like frameworks or tools because we've been doing it for long enough. But then I was trying to like, okay, well, how did I learn it? And I was like manually in the console. And so the videos are like super like long, just like manually in the console. We have to like save it manually. There's no cool CLI commands and all that stuff. But then I got feedback that it was actually helpful. So I didn't get that feedback for quite a while. So there was a few months where I was like, oh man.
They hate it. Oh, no.
Yeah, I was like, oh. And that's kind of like, it's interesting because it's, I talked to somebody else and they talked about learning in public. Do you follow that kind of thinking as well? Like putting yourself out there, and if you want to learn a topic, you're learning the topic almost and sharing it as well as you're going through it.
I'll be honest here that I respect folks that can continuously do it. I go in bursts where, and I think a bit of that is just maybe I see myself. It's weird because I've been in this space for a couple of years now, but I still see myself amongst these giants, and so putting myself out there can be a bit intimidating for me at times. Where I mean, imposter syndrome at its finest. So for me, it's bursts where I will pick a core piece of technology that hasn't been explored yet, and then I'll go ahead and blast my learning experience there. But if I'm learning something where in my vacuum of the internet, I feel like a lot of folks have already been talking about, then I'm a little shy on putting that content out there because I feel like I'm just gonna. I mean, what's going to happen is I'm going to put it out there. Folks are going to correct me, and then I'm going to learn faster. That's the actual part of it. What I think is going to happen is I'm going to put it out there. Folks are going to correct me, and then I just look like a fool in front of everybody. But that's never the case, and I want to make sure that people understand it's just imposter syndrome, and you should definitely try to learn as public as much as you can.
Yeah, and so I guess kind of getting towards the end of this this awesome podcast episode we've got going. What advice would you give to new people that are trying to get started in cloud development or with AWS or even with serverless?
I would say keep in mind that AWS has over 200 services. You're going to want to find your niche. And I think the best way to do that is to build something that you already have. If you have a resume, try to make it serverless. If you have a website, try to migrate those services over to AWS. And in doing so, you're going to realize that when it comes to serverless technology, sure, there's a bunch of cool services that we can use, but more often than not, we have like the same, I don't know, 5 to 10. Jan Choi says that there's 10 services that he always uses. I'm going to say that there's probably 5 to 8 services that I always go to, in which case you're going to want to find your own path, but keep in mind that there's only going to be a handful out of that 200 plus that you're going to be reaching for. And when you sort of narrow it down to that, don't be afraid to ask for help. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there, whether it be a blog post or a video, just to document your learning. Because at the end of the day, you want to help yourself first, as greedy as that might sound. Help yourself first with the notion that others can also learn from you. Because I think there's no greater feeling than being stuck on a problem, looking for a solution, and pulling up your own piece of documentation that you've written. It's the greatest feeling. So there's my advice.
That is amazing. That's amazing advice. And yeah, for those listening that actually follow through on it, I've had that happen where like I'll write something and then like 6 months later I'll be like looking it up and I'll be like, oh man, I should have remembered this, but good thing I made a video about it.
Yep.
Yep. Awesome. Well, yeah. Anything as we wrap up, anything that you want to shout out, any promote? Do you have any things coming up that you want to make people aware of?
Yeah, I appreciate the shout out on the YouTube video. Definitely go ahead and like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Focus Otter, you can find me there. Definitely big shout out to the AWS Communities Builders program. It's allowed me to connect with awesome folks like yourself and with other community members as well. And I think that's it. Just keep on building, have a great time, and then try to put yourself out there as much as you can.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks again for being a guest, Michael. It was great to have you on.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. You guys take care.
All right. And to those listening, this has been the Talking Serverless podcast with Ryan Jones. If you like our show and want to learn more, check out Talking Serverless.io, or please leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. And of course, join us next time as we sit down with another fantastic guest.